Hi, my name is Jerry Kroth. I'm a psych professor. Uh, I did a video about a week ago on near-death experiences, but the audio was corrupted, so we now have remastered audio. All right, so near-death experiences have been opposed by academic psychology for 130. Well, academics, the word psyche means soul. Psychology means the study of the soul. So when you are academic psychology studies everything except the soul. So anything that's coming close to the soul or leaving the body or being independent of the brain has always been forbidden. But there have been so many cases of near death experiences that it's really softening up. But here is the old point of view, okay, from academic psychology. Very short.
Are we just the activity of molecules? Are we just molecules in motion? Is this inquiry leading us to think of ourselves as just primarily or essentially or just material?
Yes. When I say that the mind is the brain, when I say that vision just is a function of the brain, that's what I mean. That there is nothing other than the cells and the way they're put together.
There's your dose of materialism for the day. Now, as we get into the topic of near-death experiences, let's talk about last words. Some people are dying, come back, going in and coming in and out of dying. And some people have very famous last words. This is a nurse. Listen to what she says.
And he just kept saying to me, "Oh my gosh, Julie, oh my gosh, Julie, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. If I only would have known, if I only would have known." And he wasn't really finishing his sentences. But he was making me feel like if I only would have known how good this is. I could cry right now thinking about it because it was so powerful. And he was making me feel like so much joy and freedom. And he was just saying to me, "I can't believe it. I can't believe it, Julie. I can't believe it. If I only would have known." And then I'm weeping in my car, right? I am full on sobbing in my car, tears of joy. And then suddenly it stopped. And I was in my car kind of shell-shocked, like, what the hell just happened? I heard my phone go off like a text, and I saw the nurse inside the house just texted me, so-and-so just died.
Okay, now here are some famous last words. Thomas Edison is dying, coming in and out, and says, "It's very beautiful over there." Steve Jobs, on his deathbed, looked at his sister Patty, then for a long time at his children, then at his life's partner Lorene, and then over their shoulders, past them. Steve's final words were, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." Now, I'm going to begin. I wrote a book called Psyche's Exile, an empirical odyssey in search of the soul. And the idea was that we're going to look at all the forbidden aspects of psychology that they don't want to look at. And I did a piece in that book on near-death experiences. And here's a guy, David Barnes. I interviewed him for probably 3 hours. Here's his near-death experience. So he's an alcoholic. And he is driving 75 miles an hour directly into a cement wall. Now, his injuries were so severe, I'm not going to tell you the bloody details, except for one, and that is that his eyeball popped out. So he was placed in an ambulance, and they thought he was dead, completely unconscious. And the ambulance is going to the emergency room. Now, he said his consciousness was outside the window of the ambulance, and he could see the people working on his body. All right? They arrive at the emergency room. I think he's pronounced dead on arrival, but he's still watching everything from his distance, his perch. And then he hears all the people in the emergency room cheer because apparently they got his heart started and he came back to life. Anyway, David Barnes spent 53 days in intensive care. Can you imagine? 53 days in ICU. So when he got out, he was in a wheelchair and he was being released from the hospital. He asked if he could go to see the people who are the ambulance drivers. And so he tried to do that. And so he wheeled himself over to two people and he said, "I want to thank you very much for saving my life." And they said, "How do you know that's us? How do you know we saved your life? You were dead, man. How do you know that we saved your life? You were dead." So he said, "No, I saw you. I saw you through the window. I saw everything." And they didn't believe it. All right, so David Barnes was so moved by this experience that he decided to change professions, and he became, I think he sobered up too, but he became a hospice worker. He said, "I have a gift to give people. You don't die. It's not bad." And I had a lot of things that I could tell people who were dying. So he became a hospice worker after this incident. All right, so we're going to go on now with other topics. Here are some characteristics of NDEs. Number one, 50 to 20% of those people who were resuscitated report an NDE. 50% of those people who were resuscitated report that they felt that they died. 56% report feeling peace, well-being, euphoria, surrounded by love. 24% report out-of-body experiences like David Barnes. 31% report going down a tunnel or up a staircase. And 32% report seeing deceased relatives. And the emphasis is on deceased, not living. Okay, this is an old study of 344 cardiac patients who were resuscitated. 62 reported very near-death experiences. A Gallup poll, believe it or not, asked, "Have you ever come close to death and had the sensation of leaving your body?" 13 million people said yes. Okay, now this is, we're going to have a number of stories. This is Victoria Thomas. She was working out in a gym, 36-year-old accountant, went into cardiac arrest. An ambulance arrived within minutes, started CPR, but as the seconds passed, Victoria was not responding. She ascended to the ceiling. When it happened, I went black and there was nothing. Then I became aware of looking down on my body. I was floating near the roof and was looking down at myself on the gym floor. My first thought was that my legs looked really fat. And when I looked at a photo of myself taken just minutes before I collapsed, I could see that my legs were actually swollen. So Victoria was taken to Bristol Hospital, spent 3 days in a coma, was fitted with a pacemaker to restart her heart. She had no family history of heart problems, was allowed home, but over the next few months, her heart stopped a number of times, but the pacemaker shocked it back into working again. She said, "I went back to playing netball 3 weeks after it happened. It was a shock whenever it went off, but it allowed me to carry on my life." Now, evidence-based NDEs, that's the most fascinating topic. That's what is called veridical near-death experiences. You're dead, but you see something. Can you prove it? Can you prove it? That's what it means to say when we say veridical, that it's verifiable. The stuff I'm going to present to you are pretty much veridical near-death experiences.
She hit us at about 80 miles an hour when we were going to severe closed head injury. Bicep was cut in half, and I was in a coma. 7 days, they induced another coma because I was going crazy, and it was supposed to only be in the coma for maybe 24 to 48 hours, and I didn't wake up. I flatlined, and I ended up being in the coma for a total of about 14 days. When I was flatlined, I remember being surrounded by a white, fuzzy light, and I was being held. Someone was hugging me. I couldn't see that person, but I knew I was with God or my higher power. I felt very pleasant. I wasn't afraid. It was very comforting. Actually, it was probably the best feeling that I've ever felt in my life, in my death. And I was just kind of so content there that I wanted to just go to that place. I wanted to be with that feeling. And just as I was about to go, you hear all the time people say, your life flashes before your eyes. Well, my life flashed before my eyes. It wasn't really what I expected. I didn't see actual people or physical things. It was more of the essence of everything, but it was very clear. I saw me with my grandchildren. I don't even have children yet. I saw me when I was younger doing things that I loved to do and playing and dancing and people I loved, and it was all about the love. And then I felt all at once like I was being sucked through outer space. It was just like so then I ended up in the corner of my hospital room looking at my body and seeing all my family sitting around upset. And I tried to tell them, for some reason I had special powers that I could move around in this form. So I would go over to my family and my boyfriend at the time, who was 16, and I would say, I'm okay, you know, and I'd try to comfort them, but they couldn't hear me, and I was so annoyed by that. And then I would get bored, and I would go in my body for a little while, and it would get too much. It would be too much pain, and so I would come back out. I got pretty comfortable being in that form. I would say, now that I think back on it, I was probably in and out of my body for about a week and a half. I would go to different rooms. My parents didn't believe anything that I was saying until I woke up one night and I went into my mom's room and I said, Mom, when I was in a coma upstairs, were you and Dad and Grandma down in the cafeteria, and Dad said this and you said this and Grandma stood up and this happened? And my mom just looked at me in awe and was like, how do you know that? And I said, I was there. And she couldn't believe that I knew word for word exactly what happened. And I was like, I just remembered I was there, because things came back to me over time. And I mean, it's been 13 years, so I'm getting pretty comfortable with it.
This is a psychologist, kind of an evangelical religious program, but the psychologist is being asked questions about the best veridical experiences that he has come across. And here's number one.
Search, you'll find that they're just not consistent with the data that we have so far from good researchers. Now, the Pam Reynolds case, let's just go straight into it. She was a 35-year-old mother who underwent a complex surgery to repair a giant aneurysm in her cerebral artery. This was reported by Michael Sabom, who is a cardiologist, one that I know personally.
I've interviewed him.
He's really he's a no-nonsense type, let's just stay with the facts guy. And he'll just go relentlessly after the facts, okay? And a neurosurgeon, Robert Spetzler, they did a surgery on this lady where they lowered her body temperature to about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, drained all the blood from her head so that her brain had ceased functioning by all 3 clinical tests. Electroencephalogram was silent, brainstem response was absent, no blood flowing through her brain. She was as dead as you can get, and they had all the documentation because they wanted to make sure she was not going to wake up during the surgery, right? So they were monitoring this continually. Additionally, her eyes were taped shut. She was put under deep anesthesia. Brainstem activity was monitored with 100 decibel clicks emitted by small molded speakers inserted into her ears, and her entire body, except for the small surgery area on the head, were covered completely. Yet, when she woke up, she said she talked about an experience that she had during that time when she was clinically dead by all counts. She described in minute detail the specialized instruments that were used for the surgery, the thing that looked more like a drill than a saw. It even had little bits that were kept inside of a case. She described them minutely. These are the instruments that you're not seeing before the surgery or after the surgery. They're over here covered up to keep sterile, and yet she describes them perfectly. Well, during that time, she went through a tunnel, talked to deceased relatives who looked like they were the prime of life, um, and eventually came back and reported these. Now, this is coming from Dr. Sabone's book, where and he's got a whole chapter detailing his research into this, where he talked to the doctors, read the doctors' records. He was not even familiar with this. He thought, this sounds crazy. Who would do surgery like this? So he went into it. He ordered the specifications for the instruments that were used to see if they looked like she actually described them. It's just a remarkable case that you can't explain away by saying, oh, well, she may have had the experience before or after the clinical death and just read it back into it. She had to have been there during that time somehow out of her body. Remarkable case.
So this is a neuropsychologist who talks about a near-death experience that someone else had. Very interesting.
Flat EEG and a flat EKG for a period of time before they're revived. And that confirmation is crucial in distinguishing a vertical perception from mere hallucinations or just a simple byproduct of the brain. When we were doing our interviews for our film, The Consciousness Connection, we attended the International Association of Near-Death Studies in Washington, D.C., where an array of elite researchers were there giving papers. And I talked with Bruce Grayson, probably the leading NDE researcher, a psychiatrist who told me a story, and it's going to be actually in our next film. And he was saying that when he was an intern, while he was eating spaghetti sauce, he accidentally spilled the sauce on his tie. He suddenly got a call on his pager, an emergency, and he wiped the ketchup, whatever it was, the sauce off the tie as much as he can, but he couldn't get rid of it completely. He went down to see the patient, who was completely unconscious, in his opinion, actually close to death. He then left her, walked several rooms down the hall, and spoke to the patient's friend to get more information about the patient. The next day, he sees that patient, and she's wide awake. And he's talking to her, and he's evaluating her from a psychiatric standpoint. And she says to him, "I remember you. You visited me last night." And he says, "That's not possible. You're completely unconscious. You were comatose. I know what you said to my friend." And she relayed exactly their conversation. And she said, "And you had that red stain on your tie, didn't you?" And from that moment on, he knew that there was something quite special about near-death experiences. That started him on the road to researching near-death experiences, after hearing that validation from someone who's in a coma.
All right, so there are a lot of people who say, no, 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 I'm not going to go there. And it's not just one side. There's another side of this story. Here's kind of funny. Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about his skepticism.
In fact, the people who say they are dying in their hospital bed and they lift up and they see themselves They look back on
Yeah,
themselves from
that's
above.
a very common
You've heard about this?
experience. Yeah,
Very
they're-
common. So you got the experiment for that, okay? We got the experiment. You set up a ledge above the bed, okay?
Mhm.
Okay. These are people who had near-death experiences, right?
Yes,
They
yes.
saw themselves and then they went back. So you set a ledge up above the bed, and then you write something, a simple saying like "roses are red" or "the sky is blue." Okay. You put that on top. Don't tell the person who is dying. When they say they went up and saw themselves, they would see this thing that you wrote and get them to tell you what it said.
Oh, that's rough.
Well, he's an experimentalist, isn't he? Now, earlier I said psychologists were very much against this, but many are coming forward. Here's Michael Schroeder, psychologist. The large body of NDE data now accumulated points to genuine evidence for a non-physical reality and paranormal capacities of the human being. That's heresy, but that's what people are saying. Here's Bruce Grayson, the psychiatrist. NDEs challenge the common assumption in neuroscience that consciousness is solely the product of brain processes, or that mind is merely the subjective concomitant of neurological events. It's more than that. So, the question is it true that the soul is the mind is the brain, and the brain is all the neural connections, and that's all there is, my friend? Remember Peggy Lee and her song, Is That All There Is? Is that all there is, my friend? Well, the answer is getting to be no. Here's a very interesting theory by a pediatric neurosurgeon who actually is starting to compose a theory about how this works. I think you'll find this interesting.
There are three questions that I want to ask today about the human soul. First of all, does the soul exist as something separate from the brain? The current materialist way of looking at things is that all of our mind is just from the brain. And if it does so, then what is the soul? And is the soul immortal? I very strongly believe that this is a question for neuroscience. That is, it's obviously there are theological answers to this and there are philosophical answers to this. But neuroscience also addresses these issues, and it does so, I think, in a fascinating way. The first question, does the soul exist as something separate from the brain? And I'd like to start with my own story. I started out as a materialist and an atheist as a young man. And in medical school, I fell in love with neuroanatomy and neurophysiology because I thought that learning about the brain, learning all the detailed, beautiful neuroanatomy would really help me understand who I was and understand what it was to be a human being. I trained in neurosurgery at the University of Miami and have been at Stony Brook on faculty there since 1991, and I've done about 7,000 brain operations. And I've learned a fair amount, in not only academically, but just in personal experience as to how the brain works and how the mind relates to the brain. I saw a number of things over my career that made me question the traditional materialist way of understanding how the brain works. The patients I'm going to show you here are real people. I've changed their names, but they're very real people. The picture on, I guess it would be which side? On your left is an MRI of the brain of a young lady, and the black there is spinal fluid. The brain is the gray stuff there. She's missing about 2/3 of her brain. That's the way she was born. The image alongside of it is a normal brain for comparison. When she was a young baby, we scanned her and found this, and we were rather pessimistic with her family about her chances of having a normal life. She grew up a completely normal person. She was on the honor roll in high school. If you met her today, you'd say, oh, she's a bright young lady. She's perfectly fine, missing 2/3 of her brain.
He then talks about, that's kind of a long video, I'm cutting it short. So he talks about a guy who was a pioneer. When people have epilepsy, what they do is they cut the corpus callosum that connects the two hemispheres. It's kind of like a big conduit. And then when they cut it, you have two, basically the left hemisphere is separate from the right hemisphere. And it does stop the epileptic seizures, but the person is basically ending up with two brains. This is a very interesting argument that he provides.
Was to cut the brain in half, essentially, so that if a seizure started in one half of the brain, it couldn't spread to the other half, and that made the seizures much easier to control and much milder. And it was called a corpus callosotomy, and we still do that surgery today. So the hemispheres of the brain are functionally disconnected. And Sperry, who was a neuroscientist, realized that you could study what each hemisphere does because they're disconnected. So he did a lot of wonderful work, and the left hemisphere controls speech, the right hemisphere controls spatial orientation, and he got the Nobel Prize for that. But one thing that he noticed, and I've noticed too, is that people who've had their brains cut in half are pretty normal people. As you meet these people, the brains are cut in half, and they're walking and talking, they feel normal. They have less seizures than they used to have. It would be the same thing as if someone just took a chainsaw and cut the laptop in half, and it still worked just fine. Like, there's something odd about this. The follow-up research on that is something that still gives me chills. And I learned about this decades ago, and I think it's among the most fascinating results in cognitive neuroscience. Justine Sergent was a researcher at McGill in Montreal, worked about 20 years after Sperry. And she studied people with split brain surgery. And what she did was she found a way to present pictures of things, like pictures of arrows, to each hemisphere separately at the same time. So she put arrows up that the right hemisphere would see one arrow, the left hemisphere would see the other arrow, but no part of the brain saw both arrows. One half saw one arrow, the other half saw the other arrow. And she asked the people, are the arrows pointing in the same direction or not? And they always got it right. But how could they compare arrows when no part of the brain saw both arrows? So she concluded that there was something in the mind that wasn't in the brain. Yair Pinto has furthered that research in which he tells stories to split brain patients, where the first half of the story is presented to one hemisphere. The second half of the story is presented to the other hemisphere. But you don't understand the story unless you see both. A good example would be if the left hemisphere can see a baseball, and the right hemisphere can see a broken window. So Pinto would ask the patient, what happened? And the patients always answered, the baseball broke the window. But no part of the brain saw both the baseball and the window. So there's something in the mind that's not in the brain.
Okay, probably the first theory I've seen that tries to explain some of this. Anyway, I've got a few more near-death experiences to show you. But while I do so, I noticed a couple things about YouTube.
That bell icon so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching.
So I don't promote my videos very well, and I realize I have 29,000 subscribers, but often when I put out a video, 50 people hear about it, and I wonder, why don't they inform my subscribers? Well, the subscribers now, with this new algorithm they have, you can't just subscribe, you have to click the notification button. So if you see the subscribe thing at the lower right of your screen, you can subscribe, but that's not enough. You have to get notified. So that's why people always say, subscribe, click the button, click the bell. So I don't know a lot about that, but you should see on occasionally in the beginning, at the end, the middle of this video, that little eye, that takes you to the notification. And if you don't click on that, you'll never hear from me again, even if you are a subscriber. Okay, enough of that. This is a really dramatic near-death experience by Barbara Bartolome.
I was a mom and married, and I had 2 children, and it was 1987. My youngest daughter had just been born, and she was just a month old when I injured my back lifting something too heavy. So about 4 months passed with the doctors examining me, and the first doctor that I saw said that I wouldn't walk again. And I went to a neurosurgeon after that, and he looked at all the tests that had been done on me, and he said that he could fix the problem. I checked into the hospital the day before the surgery, and it was December 1987 when this occurred. They were going to conduct a myelogram, which is a test where they inject iodine dye into the back of your neck, in my case, and they have you laying on an x-ray table, and they then tip the x-ray table so that the dye will flow down your spinal cord to determine whether the spinal cord was damaged when the disc blew out of the lower back area. So they proceeded to start with the testing, and they asked me to hold really still because they said once they inject the dye into my neck, if I moved at all, that I would suffer from really bad headaches for quite a few months afterwards. So I was laying very still on the table, and the neurosurgeon and the orthopedic surgeon that were going to be doing the surgery the next morning were in the room when this test was going to be done. It was lucky that they were there because the person who had his finger on the x-ray table was pushing the wrong button. The x-ray table tipped the wrong way, which caused my head to be lowered below my feet. And that caused the dye that they'd just injected into the back of my neck to flow into my brain area. And it very quickly caused me to lose consciousness. And when I lost consciousness, I went up on the ceiling. As I looked down at my body and saw the top of the heads of everybody in the room, I wasn't startled or upset or frantic or panicked. It was a very calm, it was a very wrapped in love feeling up there, like you were in the warm blanket and everything was fine. And I looked down at my body on the x-ray table, and I could hear the x-ray technician next to me calling code blue. I actually didn't know what code blue meant, but I said, if I'm up here on the ceiling and my body's down there and he's calling, frantically code blue, I think I just died. So there wasn't any alarm or worry or panic. It felt very comfortable. In the next second, when I saw that everything was going into very high-speed resuscitation efforts down below, it seemed really obnoxious, actually, with everybody kind of yelling at each other and moving very quickly. And there was a presence next to me on the ceiling, and that presence felt huge, loving, and accepting of me. And the feeling that I felt with that presence felt as though I had been part of that presence, and it had been part of me for eternity. It was unbelievable to feel that love and that acceptance and that degree of intensity that I had in those moments with this presence next to me. And down below, they were bringing in an oxygen cart, and they put an oxygen mask on my face, and this woman did that. And then there was a woman that was calling at a desk that was in the corner of the room. There was a phone over there, and she was calling for the defib unit to be brought in, defibrillation to restart my heart. In the midst of watching everything unfolding in the CPR and the resuscitation, there was this man that came in, and he had a small box that he placed on a shelf next to the x-ray table. As I was talking to this being, I was watching this man, and I didn't actually know what he was doing. I moved instantaneously from the ceiling to right in front of the box, and he flicked a little lever on the side of the box, and it turned on a green light inside the box, and it made the box start making a monotone sound. And the little green light traveled across the screen in a straight line. All of a sudden, I realized, oh, this is supposed to be going like this, and it was not registering that I had any heart rate. And when I realized it was a heart monitor, then I was instantaneously moved back up on the ceiling again, and then had the view down of my body on the x-ray table and above everyone looking down at their heads, and the whole spread out of the room. So that was very interesting. So I saw my own flat line, and what the doctor did, the orthopedic surgeon, he stepped forward 2 steps. He said, stand clear, to the people who were doing the CPR and were around the head of the table. And they backed off, and he just took his fist and he arched it from over his head, from behind his back, and he just pounded the center of my chest. I watched that from up above, and I watched my body react to that blow, but of course it did not restart my heart. And he then arched his arm back again and struck my chest the second time. And when he struck my chest, my eyes simply shut from up above, and I blinked open my eyes, and I was looking straight into his face. He stepped backwards, and the people around the table were stepping back in to stabilize me, and I started talking into the oxygen mask.
So it's a long story, but it is very, very interesting. So I've got a couple more for you. Zach is a young guy. He is walking near his father's truck, 40 or 50 meters. Suddenly he seems to have a heart attack and falls down. Here's I was probably there about 15 minutes, and the fuzziness just started getting heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier. Kind of rushing at this point to get to my dad's truck, probably 50 to 60 yards away. I'm like, okay, just calm down, just relax, you're going to be okay. And I looked at my dad, who was 30, 40 meters away by that time, and I said, I'm going, and then I went black. Zach explained that he then opened his eyes to find he was in a tunnel filled with luminescent, goldy, silvery, white flowing energy. While he also spotted a shadowy figure who was wearing a trench coat. He continued, it was just enamored, and I was just enamored in this space, like, whoa, what is this? Feeling completely at peace, no concern, no worry. I didn't even think about my body. 1 minute was there, and the next minute I was in this beautiful tunnel. So I looked forward, and the shadowy figure is just kind of waiting for me. I thought to myself, oh my, that's Grandpa. Now, his grandfather died about 6 years earlier, and here's the rest of that story. He told me, his grandfather said, everything's going to be okay. You're going to get through everything. You just have to keep going. It felt like we're in this space. We were in this space forever. But then he was suddenly sucked back into his body, couldn't move, and later on, he told his father about this story, and that his grandfather was wearing a trench coat. Now, he never saw his grandfather wearing a trench coat, and he never saw his grandfather that young. So his father dug up a photograph of his father, Grandpa, when he was a young man. He was a chemist in Prague, and he was wearing a trench coat. And Zach said, that's who came to me and said that, Grandpa. But Grandpa was a young man in a trench coat in Prague. Interesting story. Now, this is a story about a Snickers bar. It's a bit long. It's kind of an evangelical, but I think it's interesting from the evidentiary point of view.
Scared, terrified. Well, I had this head-on collision on the way to run the Austin 10K, and my back was fractured so badly that I was hanging to the side. I couldn't reach my insurance in the glove box, and I knew that I was in very, very bad shape. So I waited in the ER for 17 hours, and I had internal complications. I was just strapped to a board without pills, without anything, not even a Tylenol. Eventually, a surgeon did operate on me, and I was wheeled in for surgery, and I died very quickly. As soon as they opened up my back, I stepped out of form. And when I hear researchers and scientists talk about they need to verify it, I don't need to verify it. I know that that reality is more real than this reality. The minute I stepped out of form, I was like, here I am. This is the reality that I've been waiting for my entire life. And I knew that I was my spirit form, not this body. And I looked down at the bloody body and I was done with it. You know, that was the end. But there were two very large angels waiting there. And they were maybe 8, 9 feet tall, probably archangels, but they were incredibly intelligent, and they sent this healing light into me, my spirit form, and then they said, watch this, and they sent this healing light into my back, through the backs of the surgeons, and they lit up my body with this light, and I could almost see that the bone fragments that were pressing on my spine were going to be fine, and that they would be picked out by the doctors, and I would indeed walk. Well, at that point, the monitor flatlined, and I didn't want to look at my body anymore. I knew I was technically dead, and I left the hospital room. And here's my verifiable detail. My mom had just married someone, and this was, you know, my stepdad, but I was in college, and I didn't care to know him. He seemed nice enough, but I saw him stop and get a candy bar, a Snickers bar, out of the vending machine. And I thought, oh, well, I'll never get to know him because I'm dead. And, you know, I hope he treats her well. And, you know, I just had this moment of looking at him, and then I continued on. Coming back into my body hurt, as many experiencers talk about. I felt like this dark wind pulled me back into my body, and then there I was. And soon I woke up, and I was aware as soon as I came out of surgery that I had died. And I asked my surgeon, I had a few moments where they gave me ice chips and I was recovering, and I asked my surgeon, I died, right? You know, how long was I dead? And she looked at me, and I could tell that she was nervous about this. She did not want to talk about the fact that I had died. And she said, we thought we lost you for a couple of minutes. You're fine now. You're getting some blood transfusions. Just wait. You'll feel a lot better. And I could tell that she was trying to brush it off as I was lightheaded, but she did confirm that I was dead. And that was not what she wanted to focus on at all. And
okay, so I just have a couple more stories for you. This is from my book. These are rather unusual near-death experiences. Remember, most near-death people who have these visions meet deceased relatives. And the emphasis is on deceased. Now, listen to these two stories. They're very interesting. So Doris and Vida, suddenly Doris looked eagerly towards one part of the room, a radiant smile illuminating her whole countenance. Oh, lovely, lovely, she said. I asked, what's lovely? What I see. What do you see? Lovely, brightness, wonderful beings. Why, it's Father. Oh, he's so glad I'm coming. He is so glad. Her baby was brought to her. She was a young mother. She looked at the baby with interest and then said, don't you think I ought to stay for the baby's sake? And she said, I can't stay. If you could see what I do, you would know I can't stay. She said, I'm coming. Oh, he is so near. Then she said, puzzled, he has Vida with him. Now, parentheses, Vida died, her sister. They didn't tell her that Vida died because they felt if they told her, it would hurt her chances of recovery. She doesn't know that Vida died. But now she sees Father with Vida. She's puzzled. Vida is with him. She was astonished and puzzled, and then she died shortly thereafter. So Vida appears with her father. This is a story of Natalie, Eleanor, and Ruth, very similar. Then Eleanor seemed to rise up in almost to a sitting position. Natalie, she said, there are so many of them here. There's Fred and Ruth. What's she doing here? An electric shock went through me. She had said Ruth. Ruth was her cousin, who had died suddenly a week earlier. but I knew that Eleanor had not been told of her sudden death. Suddenly, her arms stretched out happily. I am going up with them, and she died. So there are two cases where she sees a deceased relative who she didn't know was deceased. Anyway, a couple more. This is a story of a drowned child.
Kind of a skeptic to an evidentially supported near-death experience now, not a deathbed experience of a child, but it's reported by her physician. Tell us what happened.
Yeah. So this is Melvin Morse, is a pediatric, academically oriented pediatrician who worked in emergency rooms. And so he was kind of agnostic at the time. So again, you've got a person who's not, these are not evangelicals trying to support their faith, sort of agnostic researcher guy. And somebody was brought into the hospital room, into the emergency room, and he said, as I stood over Katie's lifeless body in the intensive care unit, I wondered if she could be saved. And basically, she had been found face down in a YMCA swimming pool. Nobody knew what had happened, but when she came in, she was out of it. I mean, they did get her heartbeat started, but she was just totally unconscious, no gag reflex. Artificial lung machine was breathing for her. She was, in the words of the other physicians there, she was just a train wreck. 10% chance maybe of surviving.
Wow.
But then suddenly she recovered. And within a few days, he was able to actually go back and talk to her. So one of the things he wanted to know, and again, this is a good academic. This is a person who I've read at least one of his peer-reviewed articles, and he's the kind that documents things meticulously. So he's talking to her, and he wants to know what happened. It's important for a physician to know, did she hit her head on the bottom, by diving, or did somebody keep her under, or what happened? And so he asked her, he said, what happened? She remembered nothing about the drowning itself. Her first memory was of darkness and feeling that she was so heavy she couldn't move. Then a tunnel opened, and through that tunnel came Elizabeth. Elizabeth was tall and nice, bright golden hair. She accompanied Katie up to the tunnel where she saw her late grandfather and met several other people. Among her friends were two boys named Andy and Mark, who played with her and introduced her to many people. At one point, she was given a glimpse of her home. One of her brothers was playing with a G.I. Joe, pushing him around. Think of how specific this is,
It's
much
detailed.
like the Mark Twain. This is detail. Okay, he wasn't playing with something else, cars or Matchbox cars or whatever. It's G.I. Joe, pushing him around the room in a Jeep. One of his sisters was combing the hair of a Barbie doll, singing a popular rock song. She drifted into the kitchen and saw her mother preparing a meal of roast chicken and rice. Then she looked into the living room and saw her father sitting on the couch staring quietly ahead. Later, when Katie mentioned this to her parents, she shocked them with her vivid details, and they confirmed that that's what was cooking. That's what everybody was doing in the house. Yet this was far away. Katie was in the hospital lying there, right? Finally, Elizabeth, who seemed to be a guardian angel to Katie, took her to meet the Heavenly Father and Jesus. The Heavenly Father asked if she wanted to go home. She cried. She said she wanted to stay with him. Now, this is counterintuitive. You've got a child who wants to be with their toys, with their dolls, with their parents. She is so comfortable in this heavenly home that she wants to stay. Then Jesus said, well, don't you want to see your mother again? And she said, yes. And at that point, she awoke. So Morse, like a good researcher, he interviews the parents. He interviewed other nurses. The nurses confirmed the first thing she said when she woke up were, where's the two boys that she had met on the other side, and called them by name, and confirmed it with others. And there you have it. It took him from being an agnostic to believing there must be something on the other side.
Okay, so that's kind of summarizing our near-death tour. But there, I came across one by a neurosurgeon who was always kind of a materialist, but he got an infection, an E. coli a meningitis infection of his brain that affected his entire brain. When they took a sample of his spinal fluid, it was pus, and his entire brain was infected by this, and apparently he died and saw these things. But he summarizes something I think that's important for near-death experiences.
Dr. Eben Alexander. I'm a former Harvard neurosurgeon. I taught neurosurgery at Harvard Medical School for 15 years and other places too. So very involved in the science of the brain and mind and the nature of consciousness. Was kind of my scientific interest. And I was brought up, like most of us, in the kind of conventional 20th and early 21st century kind of conventional science of materialism or physicalism, the notion that only the physical world exists, and therefore things like thoughts, beliefs, attitudes don't have a concrete footing in reality, are not really the topics of scientific discourse. And that kind of leaves us very much in the dark.
So he describes his death, really. I don't know how many minutes he was dead, but he said he saw these huge visions of mountains and waterfalls and flowers and butterflies, and everything was stunningly beautiful in color. And he looked down and saw animals and people, gleeful people, happy people. So this is his conclusion from that experience.
And the more we can manifest love, compassion, and kindness, as has been taught by many major religions and other non-religious ethical systems for thousands of years, then we are starting to live with the deep truth of NDEs and what they're instructing us about our nature as spiritual beings in a spiritual universe. And I came to recognize in this journey that it doesn't matter if you want to call that force God, Allah, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh, Tao, Great Spirit. There are many words humans have applied to it, trying to understand it, trying to in some way kind of own it and claim it. And yet, of course, that force, as NDEers will tell you, is far beyond any individual soul being able to claim at all. Although we can certainly come to identify our connection with that beautiful God force and how it shows us we're all in this together and we're truly here to manifest love, kindness, and compassion.
That's, I think, a very interesting summary. Now, one last thing from my perspective. My mentor was Carl Jung. He was the one who influenced how I see psychology. He, in 1959, was interviewed by the BBC. Freud had died, and Carl Jung was probably the most famous psychologist in the world. And he was asked, he was a psychiatrist, and he was asked, what about the afterlife? Is there an afterlife? And he could have answered that as a celebrity, as a famous person. He answered that as a psychologist. Listen to his answer to the question, was there life after death? Sometimes people find his accent hard, so I'm putting up his words with script as well.
I remember you said that death is psychologically just as important as birth. And like it's an integral part of life, but surely it can't be like birth if it's an end, can it?
Yes, if it's an end. And there we are not quite certain about this end. Because, there are these peculiar faculties of the psyche, that it isn't entirely confined to space and time. You can have dreams or visions of the future. You can see round corners and such things. Only ignorance deny these facts. It's quite evident that they do exist and have existed always. Now these facts show that the psyche, in part at least, is not dependent upon these confinements. And then what? When the psyche is not under that obligation to live in time and space alone, and obviously it doesn't, then to that extent the psyche is not submitted to those laws. And that means a practical continuation of life, of a sort of psychical existence beyond time and space.
Interesting. So that's Psyche's Exile. You can pick it up at Amazon, and that's how you can contact me through my website. But as a summary, really, everybody has an opinion on this subject. So where do you stand? This is a great discussion topic. On the one side, you could say, no, NDEs, those are just hallucinatory experiences. People feel love because the brain is secreting these endorphins as a part of the neurophysiology of death. And that's all there is. There's no God, there's no soul, there's no heaven. You're just dead. The other point of view is that NDEs stand as excellent proof that the soul exists, that something, consciousness, the soul, leaves the body. There is a psychical existence outside of the brain. You don't die. There is an afterlife, life after death. So between these two poles is where most people stand. Well, thank you very much for watching.